Well, what we're seeing, of course, is a very significant impact of the new trade tensions between the US and a number of other countries, and a significant downgrade to global growth to about 2.8% for this year, 3% for next year. That's about 0.5 percentage point lower for 2025.
Donald Trump and the world economy keep rudely intruding on our election campaign. A sharp downward revision to global growth forecasts and Australian growth forecasts by the International Monetary Fund overnight was a stark reminder that things are not okay in the world just now.
The IMF has made that clear. No country will be completely spared the impact of these escalating trade tensions, but we are better placed.
In a strategic sense, all that uncertainty might seem to form a good backdrop for the Coalition to announce its defence policy today, with its pledge to dramatically increase spending over the decade. But the IMF's forecast was also a stark reminder that while it is fine to make big spending promises, you have to be able to show you can pay for them. And today's announcement was quickly overwhelmed by the Coalition's inability to say exactly how it intended to fund these massive new outlays.
Today we make a very significant announcement of over $20 billion to defence over the course of the next 5 years, which will bring spending up to 2.5% of GDP.
And out to 10 years, it'll be at 3%.
It is all hugely ambitious, but difficult to pay for without spending cuts, higher taxes, or something else happening to the budget. Under sustained questioning today, Peter Dutton and his defence spokesman Andrew Hastie had several answers to how the big spend would be funded. First, Hastie told Radio National's Sally Sarah that the program would be funded because
we're going to grow the economy, and by the way, this defence spending has an economic dividend as well.
Saying you are going to fund increased spending by growing the economy seems particularly bold when the IMF has literally just cut back Australia's growth forecasts. A bit like asserting you can get a better trade deal than the rest of the world with Donald Trump without evidence. But the maths also doesn't really work when your pledge is based on spending as a proportion of GDP. That is, if GDP goes up, so must the dollars.
So Andrew Hastie, I'll bring you back to the question again. Will there be government spending cuts in other departments and areas in order to pay for some or all of this increased defence spending?
As I said, we'll release our costings in due course, but there will always be trade-offs when you're making decisions of state.
The problem is that the Coalition is not telling the Australian people where the cuts will come from.
3% is a lot of money over the decade. How will you fund that?
But again, we're not signing up to Labor's recurrent spend.
That is, the opposition is saying that the Coalition's cost of living promises only last a year, and it is also going to repeal the government's ongoing tax cuts. That's how it says it will have the money to pay for the increased defence spend.
We're not going ahead with that 70 cent a week tax cut, 70 cent a day tax cut, which comes to about $7 billion a year ongoing, which is $28 billion over the forward estimates. And $17.4 billion just over this 4-year period.
What you're saying is that you're paying for this policy by repealing income tax cuts. So you're paying for this policy through bracket creep and slugging ordinary taxpayers rather than spending restraint and finding cuts elsewhere. No. Doesn't that undermine your aspiration for lower taxes over time?
A great coalition government will always be better on national security and economic management.
The Coalition said today that it would release its costings before polling day. Putting aside the less than satisfactory answers on where the money is coming from, the questions shift to why is 3% of GDP the goal and what is the money going to be spent on?
Well, in a sense, 3% has become the new industry standard for countries that are serious about preserving their security, and also countries that are interested in demonstrating that they're not just freeloaders on the US. So a few years ago, the kind of industry standard was 2%. However, since then, we've seen war in Ukraine, we've seen a very wobbly US in terms of its international commitments, and also a US that is kind of running out of patience with freeloaders.
The post-Cold War period saw defence spending drop to new lows, and last decade the Coalition government pledged to bring it back up to that industry standard of 2%. And it did, before stalling.
We've sort of plateaued at roughly 2%, so 0.1% above or below, since about 2017-2018.
Hellier says the Albanese government has committed to more spending in the last year, but that it is almost all accounted for by AUKUS and frigates. Also, while the government has committed to lifting defence spending to 2.3% over the next 10 years, there's little money being spent in the short term.
In this year and next year and the year after, it's only a few $100 million, which, when we're talking defence capability, is really a drop in the ocean. And so when we talk about the Coalition's recently announced policy, 3% is all well and good in 10 years' time, but what are you doing today? What are you doing next year?
Under Labor, we've seen $80 billion worth of cuts, delays and reprioritisations to the Defence Force, and we are now weaker as a result.
The Coalition, Mr Hastie, have said that the Albanese government removed $70 or $80 billion worth of capabilities from Defence's acquisition plan.
But Marcus Hellier says the previous government's wish list was just too big for the amount of money that they wanted to spend.
And so that's a fundamental question, I think, for the Coalition with their new policy is you've announced some more money, that's good, but what do you want to spend it on?
Drone capability, guided weapons, which we invested into, that this government's pulled money out of, our munitions and our capability across most platforms, including frigates. Our cyber defences, they're the capabilities that we need to invest in.
The claims and counterclaims about how much has been spent and should be spent will continue. They land in an environment in which old arguments about previous statements caused some heated exchanges in last night's leaders' debate.
The budget papers in 2014 have line items there, $50 billion ripped out of health, $30 billion ripped out of education. That was the 2014 Abbott budget.
Education went from $13 to $25 billion, Prime Minister.
You ripped $80 billion out of those two items in 2014.
Prime Minister, you couldn't lie straight in bed, honestly. This is unbelievable.
Go to the 2014 budget papers. People can do that online. It's all available for all to see.
Fact check. The 2014 budget papers do indeed spell out proposals by the Abbott government to cut health and education spending by $80 billion. They didn't proceed, however, because the Senate blocked the cuts. So Peter Dutton can now claim that spending actually rose in nominal terms. On the other side, the PM seemed to back away last night from Labor's previous claim that the Coalition's nuclear plan will cost $600 billion, which is based on modelling from the Clean Energy Council and presumes cost overruns. Based on other modelling, the high-end cost would still be just under $450 billion.
A $600 billion figure comes from a company that is a donor to the Labor Party, full of Labor staffers, discredited, and it is at odds with the $120 billion figure for the construction of nuclear power sites, which is the CSIRO figure.
Beyond debates about numbers, though, today's defence policy release has emphasised that both sides of politics are having to change their language about our strategic plan because we can no longer rely on the US but must defend ourselves.
America is moving to an America First posture. We still have a strong relationship with the United States, but we can't take anything for granted.
We asked Shadow Defence Minister Andrew Hastie to come on and talk about this significant announcement in his portfolio. He declined. Joining me now, Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, who's also the Minister for Defence. Richard Marles, welcome to 7:30.
Good evening, Sarah.
Now, the Coalition has announced, as we saw there, a $21 billion increase in spending on defence over the next 5 years. Given the warnings that were laid out in the Defence Strategic Review only 2 years ago about the dangerous environment for Australia, and those conditions have only worsened since, does their commitment make Australia safer?
Well, firstly, Sarah, this is no commitment. This is nothing other than a number in a press release. There is no explanation of how the money is going to be raised. There is no explanation of how the money is going to be spent. What is absolutely astounding here is that the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Minister for Defence, having had 3 years to work up this policy, announcing it just 10 days out from Election Day, announce a figure of $21 billion, and they do not nominate a single military capability that this is going to go towards. There's been no strategic thinking, no strategic direction, no strategic purpose. At the end of the day, this is just a number in a press release. There's no explanation of how they imagine getting this money out the door so that they would actually spend it in the next 5 years. This is not defence policy. This is a defence debacle. And what it evidences is an opposition who have simply been lazy in respect of defence and have not done the work in terms of coming up with a credible, coherent contribution to our strategic debate.
The Coalition says you've ripped $80 billion out of defence. Is that accurate?
It's not accurate. And what the Coalition are doing here, in the absence of having a policy of their own, they're lying about the policies of Labor. I mean, what we have done is reprioritised, in accordance with what the Defence Strategic Review advised, over $70 billion from various areas of defence into other areas of defence. And we've done that to give a much sharper, a better quality of spend in terms of the defence dollar. An example of it is that in focusing on the strategic intent of projection, we've not purchased the same number of infantry fighting vehicles, vehicles which never had any prospect of being able to leave the continent because we simply did not have the logistic ability to move them. And we've shifted that money into, for example, a much greater spend on missile stocks and longer range missiles at that. We are focusing on the question of projection. Now, if you assume, as the Liberals do, that to do any dollar of reprioritisation is in fact representative of some form of cut, then what you're actually saying is you are letting go of the strategic levers of our nation because you will not change or make any difficult decision about anything. And the idea that the strategic settings of a decade ago are fit for purpose now is obviously ludicrous. We have absolutely reprioritised money within defence.
Understood, but I just want to go back to some important targets that were set a while ago in 2016 in the White Paper. They set an important target of 40% of the defence budget being spent on capability, that is the actual material that the ADF needs. Now, you have fallen, you and subsequent governments have fallen far short of that target, haven't you?
Yeah, but in the 2016 White Paper, which was the last time there was a significant injection by the Coalition into defence spending, there was about a $30 billion increase in defence spending over the course of a decade. Within a couple of years of that, they'd taken $20 billion of that and taken it out of defence altogether. So when it all boiled down to it, all that was received out of the 2016 White Paper was about an increase of $10 billion over a decade, through, in essence, to around now. And not surprisingly, we saw a whole lot of negative impacts on the Defence Force. We saw $42 billion worth of announcements that had been made by the Coalition without a cent being put behind them. When we came to office, Sarah, a full quarter of what Defence was expecting to procure, there was no money for. Like, that is their method of operation, and we have seen that again writ large today. It is as if that if you simply write a press release, our adversaries will run from the battlefield, and that's literally what the Coalition have done today. And when they did spend money, we saw 28 different projects running a combined 97 years over time.
All right, I mean,
these people had no idea when it came to defence.
I want to go to something that Andrew Hastie said that we saw just there, that America is moving to an America first posture. That's inarguable. He said we can't take anything for granted anymore. Do you agree that we can no longer rely on the United States as an ally in the way that we used to?
We can rely on the United States as an ally. It is absolutely the case, though, that the world is much more unpredictable, and it is right that we need to be thinking much more carefully about our own innate capability, and we need to be boosting that innate capability, and that's fundamentally what we are doing. But you need then to think that through. I mean, in terms of acquiring capability for the Australian Defence Force, we will inevitably be acquiring technology from the United States, even if it's not the United States which is coming to our defence. So, for example, we have purchased more HIMARS, high mobility artillery rocket systems, which are really important for our missiles. That is product and technology which comes from the United States. as a technology partner, the United States is going to be fundamentally important. And at the end of the day, that's actually what AUKUS is. Now, in building our capability, and it's really important that we do that, it therefore makes absolutely no sense that what you would then seek to do is try and leverage the defence relationship to get a tariff outcome, and yet that is exactly what Peter Dutton has put on the table.
But let me ask you this.
If
But let me
Andrew
ask you.
Hastie is serious about it, he wouldn't have done that.
Let me just ask you this question. I mean, given the widespread uncertainty about the US administration and the questions about both their willingness and their capacity to deliver AUKUS submarines on time, should we be hedging that decision now? Should you be putting money into purchasing other capabilities like long-range bombers as a hedge against not receiving the submarines?
Well, we are building our defence force and the capability of it. And it actually matters that we stick to a plan here. I mean, unlike the Liberals who chopped and changed in all that they did, particularly in respect of submarines, in and out of a deal with Japan and then in and out of a deal with France, and all that means is that you actually don't build a submarine capability at all. They left us with a 10-year capability gap with our submarines. What we are doing is pursuing a program in accordance with the treaty-level agreement that we have with the United States and the United Kingdom, and that will see us ultimately constructing our own submarines here in Australia. That is actually what is the end game in terms of the AUKUS program. And it's not right to say that.
Sorry, let me just jump in here. I want to bring you to a subject of today, away from the opposition's policy. There are reports today that the Australian military is taking part in joint US-Philippines exercises in the part of the Philippines closest to Taiwan. They are described as rehearsals for war. The US Marine Colonel in charge said it is a war plan being tested. Why are Australian military involved in exercises preparing for war with China?
Well, I don't necessarily embrace that language.
Well, let's be clear. This is the language of the US military commander. The Philippine commander, who is the co-commander of these exercises, also called it a war plan being tested, a full battle test.
Well, what you do when you do an exercise is you practice for the real thing. Like, we always do that in terms of all the exercises that we are doing. And so when I say I don't embrace the language, the way in which you asserted the question is what I'm referring to. When you do exercises, you are practicing for the real thing. That is actually what a defence exercise is. And we are doing more exercises with the Philippines, and we're doing more exercises with the United States, and we're doing them more in a trilateral way as is described. And it's really important that we are doing that to build the network of capability and interoperability with defence forces within our region. You know, it is about building our own innate capability. It is absolutely about pursuing our alliance with the United States, but it's also about building our defence relationships with countries in the region. We're doing that more with the Philippines, but we're doing it more with Japan. We look forward to doing it much more with Indonesia as part of our defence cooperation agreement with Indonesia. These are positive steps forward in terms of building the lattice of stability which exists within our region. And that's why you engage in those capability exercises and those capability demonstrations.
Richard Marles, thank you very much indeed for joining us.